Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, your premier platform for real-time global insights. I want to begin first with a map that shows you the 3,251 separate reports of severe weather that we saw from June 2nd through June 10th. Each circle here shows you where one of those reports was across the United States. Many of these reports came from severe straight-line winds out of some of our powerful thunderstorms. In fact, we recorded 3 separate derecho events during that time period, those being those long, damaging squall lines. Well, as higher pressure built in under a ridge in the midsection of the United States over the weekend, severe weather really backed off with only 108 reports over the time period of June 11th through the 14th, as a lot of the severe weather moved out of the United States and into Canada. But I just want to keep you up to date on where we currently stand with our counts of tornado and wind reports. Right now, we're sitting about middle of the pack on our total accumulated number of tornado reports, and the data go from 2005 to 2020. When you look at it, though, remember that because of 2008 and 2011, the mean, the average, that thick black line there, is elevated a bit. So you would say we're right about on average with our number of tornado reports, and that was after an extremely busy April time period. Over there on the right, in terms of severe wind reports, we're currently sitting in second place right here over the last 15 years in terms of total number of severe wind reports, with only 2011 being more active. And so far this year, the most dominant type of severe weather has been these severe wind reports. What's interesting is hail, though. Now, there have been some reports of massive hail across the United States, but when you add them all up, 2020 is currently the lowest in terms of the accumulated number of hail reports through this time of year. So in 15 years, this is the fewest number of hail reports that we've had so far. Now, over the weekend, that hail was up in parts of Canada. Beth Allen putting out these great images here. This one near Vauxhall, Alberta, which is just about 50 miles southeast of Calgary, of one of the powerful supercells that went racing through that area. On radar, we caught a pretty rare sight. So what you see over here on the left is a radar image, and Vauxhall is located right there. And so we had 2 separate supercells, one here and one here. Now, what I want to draw your attention to on this image are these features sitting just on the southeast side of those supercells. What those are called is they're called hail spikes. So sometimes when the radar beam passes into the middle of a storm where there's a lot of large hail, the hailstones reflect the radar beam down toward the ground, where it bounces, come back up in the middle of the storm, hits the hailstones, and then gets reflected back to the radar, thus giving us this echo. Now, because it takes extra time for the radar beam to bounce off the hailstone, hit the ground, come back up, and then go back to the radar, we get a spike behind it, just like this. So now I'm going to remove those drawings so you can see those hail spikes very clearly. And that's just a very good indicator of some large hail that was in this storm. Now, the video over there on the right really kind of shows you what it did. This, again, a great video showing you just the immense amount of hail that came out of this storm in this particular part of the Canadian prairies here. Outside of that, come over to parts of Oregon. Damascus, Oregon, showing us here a supercell that went through producing rapid rotation and some debris. And this was one of the tornado reports that we had over the weekend here. Just amazing to see storms like this in Oregon for this time of year. When we look back over the last 72 hours, a few things I want to point out. Overall, we can see the net flow of the atmosphere. With the larger ridge building in the middle part of the country, we did have flow that kind of came in like this. And as the trough swept into the parts of the Pacific Northwest, we did get some pretty heavy rainfall that came into parts of the Columbia Basin. Got some reports over the weekend of a 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches of rainfall in a place that typically doesn't get much rainfall this time of year. I'm talking about this area right in through here, and many folks are right in the middle of cutting their Timothy hay. Meanwhile, outside of that, you can see the other pieces we're going to watch this week. A cutoff low went kind of sweeping through parts of the central and eastern Corn Belt, and it is going to sit here and spin over parts of the Mid-Atlantic and the Carolinas. And what you've got here, the heavy precip we saw along the eastern seaboard here, was from the remnants of last week's combined systems of Cristobal and that back-end low, where they left a cold front kind of dangling in that area. With that as a backdrop, let me just show you the upper level flow pattern from yesterday into early this morning so you can see these pieces coming together. And the cutoff low that we see starting here that's moving toward the mid-Atlantic and parts of the Carolinas is going to be there for a lot of time this week, producing a major flood threat. Meanwhile, we're still seeing the slow progression of this upper level wave that's moving into Canada, and out ahead of it, we have a ridge that's building. And so this particular picture as it's being painted is really going to set us up for what to expect this week. So early this morning, from about 3 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the morning, this is what our precipitation was looking like. We can see some lightly scattered precip through the midsection of the country. We can also see more widespread rainfall coming through parts of Oregon and Washington, and then over the south, really the southeast mid-Atlantic area, we are going to just see widespread precip like this, well, for the next several days. So to show you just the next 60 hours, I want to play for you the high-resolution NAM from this morning. You can see the heavier precipitation that sweeps into the Pacific Northwest at the beginning of this animation, once again giving them rainfall during a time period which is normally pretty dry. We're going to have to watch out for thunderstorm activity there as well. You can see the cutoff low over parts of North Carolina, Virginia. You can see the daily convection that's happening all across our southern region here, just on the heat of the day. But outside of that, no major frontal boundaries early this week passing in the midsection of the country. We're going to wait toward the end of the week before we start to see the rain chances there increase. And that's what you've got. Over the next week, as we get toward the end of this week, we're going to be seeing chances of precipitation in the midsection of the country really increase. We've already talked about the Northwest with the trough sweeping through and that almost cutoff feature that's going over the Carolinas, which could produce some major flooding problems in North and South Carolina as well as Virginia this week. If you're to the south of this area down here, daily pop-up thunderstorms will be the name of the game, but I'm going to mention something here. This will be thunderstorm-like activity that comes through parts of the western Corn Belt and the central Corn Belt and the Great Lakes states, which means at the end of the week, as we see what this did, there will be places that miss out on this rainfall. And given how dry things had been in parts of this area over the last 5 or 6, 7 days, this will be some critical rainfall that either could be had or could be missed. So we need to take a close look at that. Comparing it all to normal, well, without the more organized convection or any sort of a tropical system coming through here, we see that is dry across the south, just pop-up storms. But near average to wetter than average here, flooding threat over here in the east, and also we're going to watch into parts of Idaho and Montana for some thunderstorm activity and some heavier rain. And look at this section of the Canadian prairies, still picking up more precipitation yet again this week. So we compare all of that to this map, which is our calculated soil moisture anomaly change from the beginning of the month. And what's interesting is you can very clearly see the path of Cristobal coming right in through here, but do notice on either side, drier conditions have prevailed. And that's what we saw an expansion in the drought from the drought monitor in last week's update, coming farther into the Central Plains. And given that we're not expecting a lot of rainfall there over the coming days, concern is going to be continuing to show me that we're going to have to watch out for drought development. It's not being helped by the winds either. I've got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So you can see it this whole week showing up here. And I want you to focus specifically on the Central Plains because we can see our winds are basically doing this. And the problem is the winds are coming out of Texas and New Mexico and not out of the Gulf of Mexico, which means this is going to be very windy conditions in the Central Plains, but those winds are going to be relatively dry. So this is going to continue that issue we've been discussing in the South Central Plains with drier conditions. Also, to start off the week, we're having very windy conditions here in the central basin of the mountainous region in the west, and that's going to increase fire threat there as well through the first 3 days of this week. In terms of severe weather, got them labeled here. Monday, we're going to watch a few different places around the country, but as that bigger wave emerges into central Canada, we're going to watch the northern plains on Tuesday and again on Wednesday for severe weather. By the time we get into Thursday, that's when the activity picks up here and here Thursday into Friday. So that's my severe thunderstorm index that we developed here at Nutrien. Andrew Pritchard and I developed here at Nutrien, kind of showing us where we're going to be on the lookout for the possibility of storms as that frontal boundary sags into the midsection of the country. And it continues in the day on Saturday. So this is going to be a stormy end of the week and weekend for this section of the country. Now outside of that, where you see all this shading, this is going to be daily convection. It's just saying the thunderstorm environment is decent there to give us some daily thunderstorm activity as we work through the end of this week. I want to switch models though and show you the Europeans' view of this. And again, you're going to see this a lot. Do you see how tightly spaced these isobars are? That's going to be that strong south-southwest wind in through this area all week. As I get this planned, you're going to notice the major areas we talked about. Here, Northwest Canadian prairies, and then it's at the end of the week where things get going here. So let's just play this and watch it move. Working through the middle of our week, this is now Wednesday, getting into Thursday morning. Thursday afternoon and evening. This is where we start to see finally, after coming through the northwest, through the Canadian prairies, the frontal boundary moves into this part of Minnesota, Iowa, South Dakota, Nebraska, this area, such that on Friday afternoon, getting into the evening hours and overnight, that's where we're going to watch, that would be Thursday afternoon, evening hours and overnight, we're going to watch for thunderstorms in through this area. Now that frontal boundary isn't moving too fast. So as we get our way through Friday into the afternoon and then trying to get into Saturday, again, see that boundary there? This is where they're going to be on Friday. Working our way into the overnight hours on Friday, into Saturday morning now. It's again a stormy end of the week and weekend in through this quarter, which we kind of pointed out a few moments ago. And if you've been watching, all around it, to the south, pop-up thunderstorms. Over here over the Carolinas, just that cutoff low not going anywhere, keeping things soggy. And finally, as we work our way into Sunday morning, afternoon, and evening, things begin to shift and move over toward the east. And it's at that point we might be watching a decent plume of moisture coming into parts of Texas, which would be critical to see happen. But we're already out a week in this forecast. Now what I want to do next is I want to show you the day 10 pattern. What we see here as we get out to day 10 is this feature here, and just a broader ridge sitting here over California. We do notice that in the European, we have a trough here and troughing south of the Aleutian Islands. Now I want to compare this to the GFS. Notice how much deeper this trough is here over the Aleutian Islands, stretching up into like the Bering Sea and the Arctic, and therefore how much deeper compared to normal the trough is in this area. Why this is critical is because as we transition from day 10 out to day 15, the European model, just follow this with me, the European model keeps the flow something like this. Now the GFS does this. Deeper trough here, and a bit more northwest flow coming into a trough that's going to be sitting generally in this area. So they both feature a ridge sitting somewhere in here, but it's the upper level flow that's going to be critical for us to understand the week 2 pattern. In my opinion, I'm going to talk about this a lot on Wednesday, I believe it's the tropics that are ultimately giving us the lack of consistency in our models into week 2. Because what I got over here on the left is the GFS ensemble, and on the right is the European. And we can see how wet the GFS is here, and the European is just trying to keep this high pressure cell here and a bit of ring of fire type precipitation around it. And we see near average to drier than average to the north of there. We're going to talk a lot about this and discuss what is changing in the tropics and how the momentum is transporting out of the tropics as we work our way into June and the critical month of July for crops around the whole of the United States. But I wanted to back this up with some other information. So looking at this analog technique put out by SIPS out of St. Louis, we can see that days 6 through 8, this is the end of this week and weekend, is stormy in through here. Dry in this area, dry across the south. Look at days 9 through 11, still, this is as the front pushes through, stormy in through here, but drier in the higher plains. And as we then get out to that 12 to 14 day time period, June 25th to the 27th, because the GFS has got the ridge here but some northwest flow, it's generally keeping this area stormy as we work our way toward the end of June. Now, I'm always asking myself at this time of year, is anything going to shut down the Gulf? And so I went out and I found these years where in the midsection of the United States where we've shut down the Gulf and gotten hot and dry in June and July. A few things have to happen. Jet stream level winds, look over here on the left, have to be weak into this area, very weak. The jet stream needs to be really far to the north. Secondly, we need to build in higher atmospheric pressure sitting right in through this area. That high is a blocking high that then doesn't allow the return of Gulf moisture to come up in this direction. And as a result, look at what it does to humidity levels. They really, really drop off in that area. And that lower relative humidity, well, it just tells us we don't have it in the atmosphere to produce big precipitation events. So what we see here, now these are the same panels just organized a little differently. I don't yet see the jet stream making its full retreat weak and north just yet as we work our way all the way out to the 26th of June. We see higher atmospheric pressure extending from the Bermuda high here over into parts of the southeast, meaning we will get flow around that high. The high is in the wrong place to block the Gulf of Mexico. And you can see it in through here. We can almost see convergent wind in this area, which is why I'm tending to buy this hot but wet situation. A lot of thunderstorms. I just don't see what could shut down the Gulf just yet. So let's talk about the temperature side of this as we finish up our video. On Saturday, take a look at this. This was Saturday the 13th. We had patchy frost in parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, northern Michigan, UP Michigan, and also in parts of Ontario. That was a pretty chilly air mass that moved into that area with drier conditions. What are the temperatures going to be doing this week? Well, this is a snapshot on Monday. Cloud cover, keeping things cool here. The trough coming into the northwest, keeping it cool there. But that heat builds out ahead of this in the plains, and that's going to be our story throughout much of this week. Are you ready? So here's Monday's temperatures, color coding departure from normal. This is how things look by the time we get from here into the day on Tuesday. Look at the heat building into the central plains while it's cool in the corners. See that? As we go from Tuesday into Wednesday, Thursday, and then working toward the end of our week on Friday, that's when that heat finally starts to move. See it here? Now we're talking about widespread 90s across much of the eastern Corn Belt. Still high heat down here in Texas, but the cooler weather, the unsettled weather, the stormy weather will be right on this boundary toward the end of the week, which is what we kind of described at the beginning of this video. As we get our way from into Saturday and Sunday, the storminess and the cloudiness in this section of the United States keeping things cool as the west flips back over warm and we start to bring temperatures back up and along the northeast all the way down here along the east coast of the United States. Now beyond that, let's go take a look at what the 6 to 10 day time period favors. We're talking about above average temperatures in the west in the Canadian prairies, both in the European over here on the right and in the GFS. The GFS is bringing a little bit more cooler air into the central part of the United States, whereas the European's keeping it closer to average. Here's where the big differences settle in, and this is why we've been talking about this. The 11 to 15 day time period. Both agree with warmth out west, see that? But with the European model, not having the northwest flow coming down like this, but instead flattening it out a bit, I think that's the reason why we're seeing much more widespread, above average temperatures here, whereas the GFS is favoring closer to average temperatures in that area. This is the number one thing we got to be watching right now, why our models are showing up with differences here and what's causing that. Again, I'm thinking it's coming out of the tropics. I'll explain that to you again on Wednesday. I want to give you a very quick rundown of what's going on globally. We're going to focus in on two areas. We'll talk about Europe and the Black Sea, and we'll talk about China as well. As I play this forward, this is going to show you your last week's worth of precipitation. Look around Europe first. Very stormy week in through here, and then as we got to the middle and end of that week, the storms really started to erupt in and around the Black Sea area, bringing in some moisture. At the same time, we did have a few separate systems that went through. Look here. This is Beijing over here. This is some pretty prime growing area in China, and this is north of the Korean Peninsula where it's also quite a bit of good growing area. So rains in the Black Sea, rains north in China's main growing areas. And why we talk about that is because as we look forward in the forecast, Black Sea's right in through here, okay? So we do see that parts of Ukraine getting over into this part of Europe right over here showing up wet, whereas much above average temperatures are going to be hitting some drier conditions here in this part of Russia. So you can see the heat over there on the right. And finally, the long-range European model that was released on Friday. It's got an interesting picture painted right in through here. So just remember, Beijing is about right there. So this is where we have a lot of farm ground in through this area. And the European's shown up very dry, and we do have some patchy regions there. Look at the map on the right where there's some soil moisture problems. So we got to watch this part of China carefully moving forward. Okay, that's where I want to stop here today. Thank you so much for starting your week off with me. Have a good one. We'll talk to you again very soon. Thank you.